Perfect. So we'll go ahead and get started. And I'm going to apologize in advance. We have some IT stuff that's going on behind the scenes that's making video kind of glitchy today. So that should be on the state side. So if our faces freeze, it's probably not your internet. Anyway, hope everybody had a good weekend. Obviously, this is our monthly advanced consult group meeting. And this is where we talk about issues, policy, and get your ideas, and also listen to our stakeholder groups if there's anything trending that we need to be paying attention to as we roll out, develop and roll out our broadband programs. The agenda went out this morning, so thank you guys for your patience on that. There's a couple of updates. Obviously, there's a lot of activity happening. So in the broadband office, even though we're kind of on pause in a few areas, but we'll go ahead and just take a few minutes and let staff kind of give you a few updates, and then we'll open up the floor to any discussion. So with that being said, Paige, do you want to kick us off?
Sure, thank you. Paige Osmond, Senior Policy Advisor with OIT's Government Affairs team. We are in the final stretch of the legislative session. It adjourns on Wednesday, May 8th. So there's a lot happening right now, a lot of things happening very quickly. Just going to give a couple updates on some broadband bills. We have HB 24-1336. That is the Sunset Broadband Deployment Bill. That was OIT's legislative agenda bill this session. It did pass the House and pass the Senate on May 1st. There was a lot of support there. So there was 35 yeses and 0 nos. Happy to see that one go through. The sister bill to that was HB 24-1234, Sunset Review of High Cost Support Mechanism. It has also passed the House and passed the Senate on April 15th. Strong support there as well, with 31 yeses and 1 no's. Another bill is HB 24-1334. That's the broadband service for multi-unit buildings. And those bills, we just are expecting the governor to sign. Very excited for those to pass through and looking forward to their success. Another bill would be HB 24-1036. This is the repeal of certain tax credits. That did pass the Senate Appropriations Committee on May 2nd and was referred to Senate Committee of the Whole. It's up for second reading today. We do expect that one to pass as well, and looking forward to it. Another bill is HB 24-1245. That's the Fair Labor Practice Requirements for Broadband Projects. That one passed Senate Finance Committee on Saturday and was referred to Senate Appropriations. We are now just awaiting for it to be calendared for Senate Appropriations. Another bill was SB 2491. That's Rights of Way Permits for Broadband Deployment. That was heard in the Senate Transportation and Energy Committee on May 1st, and they did vote to postpone it indefinitely. We are having our last broadband legislative stakeholder call for this session on Wednesday, May 8th. So if you'd like to join, please register. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to myself or Michael McReynolds, OIT's Senior Government Manager. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Paige, for that update. Does anybody have any questions for Paige? Okay. We're hearing none. I'll move on. So just want to talk a little bit about a piece of legislation, House Bill 24-1245, the labor requirements for broadband projects. Paige just mentioned that. That is still moving through the process, but I just wanted to make folks aware on this call. And I know, Sandra, you're on this call too, so if you have anything that you want to say, you can certainly chime in as well. And this is a piece of legislation that's been in the works, even though, it's been this session that we've had a bill. The conversations have been in the works for well over a year. And so I just want to say that, the broadband office and our labor folks have been trying to work out kind of some deal around, increasing the standards for labor in the BEAD program specifically. And so through different iterations, we're here today. The bill's still moving through the process. I don't have a crystal ball on anything. Of course, it's kind of hard in the legislative session to have a crystal ball until the pencils are down on some of these policies. But in terms of just bringing your awareness to it, this is a piece of legislation that would change how we the process for BEAD as of today. we would have to pull back and make the changes in the bill that would now become law to our initial proposal, volume 2. And there's just a couple of things. The bill's been pared down quite a bit, just through talking with the other side on different elements that are really challenging for the CBO and our stakeholders. And so, I think it's more of a one size fits all approach for all of our industry partners and local government. But what it does specifically, if I were to highlight what it does is it just delays the BEAD process for up to a year, just the way it's written. And so, I just want to say to everybody on this call that CBO is not anti-labor. We're not anti fair wages, prevailing wages. We're not anti that. We want our industry partners to have a skilled workforce, pay their people fair wages. We absolutely do, and I think there's a way to get there, absent of legislation. So I think that we are open to those conversations. We want to make sure that it works for everybody. So regardless of the what happens this session, we're open to working on what that could look like in the future. I don't think that this is a subject that should go away or we shouldn't talk about, but how do we come together so that we don't come up with a one size fits all approach? Because I do think that, where some of our larger providers can handle this, we have so many small mom and pops that, they don't even understand how federal programs work. And I'm not insulting anybody's intelligence. I do this for a living and I'm constantly confused. So even as an expert, if we're confused, I can't imagine how our folks in the field feel about some of these programs. So, but I'm really looking forward to looking at this subject a lot further, regardless of what happens this session. Again, we have a few days to do a lot of work, so anything can happen. But I do want to say to the folks at CWA that I am open to that, Sandra, and everybody on the call. I think there's another approach, other approaches we can take, and I'm looking forward to having those conversations. The big thing about this bill, other than delaying the BEAD, is it does apply the way it's written. It applies to potentially OIT employees, local governments, utility providers, nonprofits, economic development districts. I don't know about the tribes. I don't think the tribes, but there's a lot of folks that this bill would apply to, and so it makes it a lot more challenging on the implementation side of things. So I do want to say real quickly, Sandra, before I jump in, our providers, anybody who's taking federal funds is subject to Part 200 CFR that has all of the Fair Labor Standards Act, Equal Opportunity Acts, everything that's required under the law to hold people's feet to the fire in terms of reporting. So even though in our volume 2 it says that we're not putting that in our contracts, because I wasn't able to really intelligently speak to it on Saturday. Our providers and stakeholders are still required to follow those. We just couldn't put the language in volume 2 in our contracts because it's not the state template. But it is required. So it will be in our contracts and other places. So I just want to say that we're not anti-labor. I really want to work with the other side to really figure this out and see what works best. So I'll stop there and let anybody chime in or ask any questions.
So Brandy, my understanding is that this bill requires that the scoring be 25% for fair labor practices in the overall ranking of bids. Is that correct?
Well, that was the previous version. The most recent version that was stripped away. Oh. So it doesn't address any labor criteria. But we were able in our initial proposal, volume 2, to bump up the labor pieces of our criteria. So the order of weighting is 30% for the BEAD outlay. And then the other 30% is affordability. And then labor is 22% of the criteria. So the remaining criteria weightings are for other things like speed to network, the reliability of the network, local initiatives, prioritizing those. So labor is in the top 3 of the scoring in the BEAD program. So it's a huge significant part of the scoring criteria. We think it works really well. But that's where we landed on the scoring criteria. And that's what we had discretion over. So a lot of the criteria we do not have discretion over, but we had discretion over to bump it up. And we did that in the secondary criteria, not the primary criteria, because that had to stay the same. So out of the discretionary criteria, labor is the highest ranking.
Good.
I'd prefer to have a conversation with you offline because I'm just really confused with everything you said. It's like I can't. I'd rather not even talk about it here. But yeah, I love to have ongoing conversations with you about that. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Sandra. Anybody else have anything before we move on to Jonas? All right. Go ahead, Jonas. You can go over capital projects funds.
All right, Brandy, thank you. And yeah, good information about the labor requirements and pending legislation. Hopefully we can come up with a solution that doesn't have such a negative impact on BEAD. But moving on to CPF, some new developments there that we wanted to share with you. And I just want to start with talking about the CBO's primary initiatives. One of them is ensuring efficient allocation of funding in our grant programs by making an effort to avoid any kind of redundant investments in areas that are already serviced by existing networks. So, preventing overbuilds. And so one of the ways we do that is obviously through our challenge process. And through that challenge process, we were able to identify and remove locations that were already proven to be served. And that has resulted in a surplus of just under $760,000 in CPF funding. So to maximize the impact of this additional funding as quickly and effectively as possible, we have initiated what we're calling the Location Modification Program, which is exclusively available to the applicants that have already been granted projects under CPF. And what the program does is it employs a competitive application process dedicated to enhancing already awarded CPF project areas by incorporating additional unserved locations. So the applicants are tasked with identifying unserved areas not covered by their existing CPF awards. And those additional locations must logically extend the scope of the already awarded project area. Really, it comes down to who can increase the amount of unserved locations the most for just under $760,000. So the application window is for this program is currently open until the 17th of this month. And then once that window closes, the CBO will evaluate those applications to determine which can best serve the most underserved or unserved locations. And then those successful applicants will receive that additional funding to support their efforts. So we're super excited about this additional opportunity for our CPF awardees and the locations that will benefit from it. And with that, I will pause here for any questions. Mr. Hiddle, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Hi, Jonas. How are you?
Doing well.
Doing well. Good, good. So I see it's very highlighted that it says underserved there, or unserved. See, I did it even not meaning to. But the original CPF applications were a combination of primarily or prioritized on unserved and some underserved. Are you taking extensive applications for like a mix or just strictly unserved that are adjacent to the project areas that were already proposed and accepted?
I think a lot of that will determine what we get back from the applicants.
Jonas, we were really bad at Do you know what it is? Do you guys hear the echo?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
And then it
Is
goes
that
away.
it?
Sorry, I
Yeah.
think it's Eric. I think you have to mute and unmute
Yeah,
yourself.
it was I just had it unmuted while I was talking, so it's the setup I have right now is kind of lends to that on Google. So I'll turn off when I'm not speaking.
Go ahead,
Okay.
John.
So I think, it really depends on what we get back from the applicants as far as project areas. Our focus is going to be on as many unserved locations as possible, depending on what that looks like. If we need to incorporate some underserved as well, I think we're probably open to doing that, but it really is going to be focused on getting as many unserved locations that are adjacent to these existing projects as possible. Any other questions?
Yeah, and maybe I can clarify just a little bit, Eric, is you can use the funds for underserved, but the criteria for which grant is going to be awarded is just based on how many unserved are granted. But yes, CPF funds can be used for unserved. You can also you can go buy served locations, of course. You don't get funding for those, but you can go buy, your network can go buy served locations.
Yeah, excellent points, Judd. Thank you for clarifying that. All right, what else about this location modification program? Any additional comments or questions? Okay, then back to you, Brandy.
Great. Thanks, Jonas, for that. And thanks, Eric, for that question too, as well, and Judd. So moving on from CPF, again, we're sharpening our pencils on that program, and this is essentially the last tranche of funding for that program. So we have a distributed, we're starting to work on the contract. So it's been really great because we've been able to automate that. If it's working really well, and I just want to thank the team for making that happen in such a short period of time. So we talked a little bit about the middle mile program at our last meeting, and I want to just let you guys know that we don't have a full-blown presentation for you right now, and a lot of that is because we need a little bit more time to put that together, and we also have to run it by our leadership before we put it out to the public. And so you are part of that process of looking at it. So we don't want to put it out before we talk to you guys as well, but we definitely want to make sure that we have some buy-in from leadership before we share it with this group. As you can imagine, between CPF BEAD and the legislative session being busier than we thought it was going to be, we just haven't. Jonas is working on it right now, and he's working with our internal stakeholders to figure out what the best approach is there. So we're coordinating groups internally, and the next step is to coordinate groups externally, and that just doesn't take place really quickly, especially in a government our size, but also with the program this size. And but we will, but I can give you a sense of where we're heading, and if you guys have any reactions, we can certainly discuss those. But this program is a lot of things. It's what the CBO is doing on the network side. It's also what we're looking at. It's what we're thinking about for the intake side. So when I say intake, this is really partnering with CDOT on fiber leasing and all the permits that they have to go through with industry to construct middle mile facilities. And then there's also the policy arm of it and strategy. So there's the huge strategy piece of this that's missing in the current assessment of our assets as the state. So just to kind of give you a few ideas, and these are things that I've shared publicly with folks. And I'll start with, and I always tell Jonas and team, it's kind of a three-legged stool, if you will, to stand up a middle mile program. And, and a lot of states are actually looking at this. We have several models that we are looking towards. So Arizona, Utah, California, Some of those states are, well, they're all of them are much further ahead than we are. I mean, they actually have middle mile programs, so kudos to them, and they started years ago. So Colorado is really, really far behind in this space, and it's not for lack of effort. It's just kind of every state's evolution of how they set up their broadband programs. And so the first piece of this really, and we'll have more details. We'll share the slide deck at some point with you all next month. Next month is when we'll have all the details. But so the first piece of it is the strategy, and I'll start with strategy because you have to start there. We have a couple of things that we're considering in our strategy. It's the current assessment, a current state of middle mile infrastructure in our state. You know, folks ask us for maps all the time of where our infrastructure is, what condition it's in. I mean, and CDOT, you know, has not conducted this analysis in a lot of detail. They know where they don't have it, but I don't know if they understand too, you know, really where everything is and the condition of it, how old it is, whose it is, and that's just a maturity of how we do things, you know, how we've done things with the state. And I think the demand, you know, obviously is elevating this conversation, especially, you know, politically, but it's really highly visible. There you go, Jonas. Yeah, where how many strands there are. I mean, we are really, really, really at the beginning stages of this process. And I'm glad we're here. I wish we were further ahead because it's not helpful for BEAD or CPF or even our state broadband program, but at least we're here. And so we have to do that work. We have to know where we are to know where we're going to head. And so we're going to be working this summer to, essentially work on an RFP to contract this out. I know there's been conversations over the years where we can do it in-house. And when, you know, I hear folks in government saying we can do this in-house, I think it makes sense. But I think for something like this, if you want to see it happen this decade, you might want to help. You might need some resources to help you get this done. So there's that piece. And once we have that data, we will know so much more about where we need to head in terms of what areas of the state we need to prioritize, what fiber leasing agreements we can entertain at the most efficient level because there's already fiber, because we know how many strands there are. There's also the other piece of this is a statewide network, and I'm not pushing for that. There's conversations. I'm not pushing either way because we haven't figured it out. But what does our network need to look like long term for our stakeholders? So case in point, we have Region 9, we have Region 10, Project Thor 12, Region 12. We have these networks where we have consortiums in our state that have come together very successfully and have put together networks that have benefited everybody from the public sector to the private sector. Matter of fact, because of some of these networks, it's opened up opportunities for providers to come in and serve where it was very, very cost prohibitive. So, and those consortiums have brought down the price of constructing middle mile facilities through grant making, mainly through DOLA. And so, and maybe in ARPA dollars as well. So there's been a lot of public investment in middle mile. And so it has opened up access for industry to help out. Some of this fiber, if not all of it's riding on CDOT fiber. And so we have basically nonprofits functioning as ISPs. And so as a state, leveraging state assets. So we as a state have to figure out what's the best solution for those networks over the long term. Because, you know, a lot of these nonprofits, not like COGS, for example, economic development districts, you know, they're looking at us like, hey, you know, maybe we should partner. Well, they want to partner with the state to make sure that these networks last for a very long time. And so, so we're looking at that, like, what is the role of consortiums in our middle mile program? Because we need to honor the work that's been done. We do have agreements and legal agreements with these organizations. to provide middle mile, working with local governments and providers. So how do we honor that? How do we either fold it into a state network or not fold it into a state network, looking at it from an operational perspective? So there's a lot of pieces to that particular stool of the or the leg of the stool, if you will. How does that play into what a network could look like? I will tell you that we're not in a position at this point really to say, yeah, we're going to go 2 feet into a statewide network. I think we need to figure out where we are, working with our stakeholders, making sure it's really well workshopped. And I know the CBO can pull off that kind of level of engagement, because that's what we've been doing for the last couple years, especially with all this federal funding. And we want to make sure that, you know, we get it right for the people that for the people that need to be served and the people that are already working on these networks. And so that's the other piece of it. So there's a stakeholdering piece on that that's really important to the CBO that we're going to be working on this summer. I guess basically soliciting feedback on strategies that the CBO can move forward with, and roll that into an RFP so a consultant can help us with some of that work. And so there's that piece, and so we're working on the policy side of it as well. You know, a lot of what we're thinking about is going to require maybe some legislation. I don't know. I mean, we don't know at this point what it's going to require, but I think whenever we do go to our policymakers, the best thing we can do is present a plan that works, that has been stakeholdered and workshopped across the state. Our legislators, you know, I can tell they're thirsty for the best idea, and we haven't studied the best idea yet. And they're looking for that. They're looking for CBO. They're looking for all of us on this call, quite frankly, to give them the details and the information that they need, so that they can pass legislation that makes sense for the now, but also into the future to accomplish our goals. And so we're really motivated to work with everybody on this call, everybody across the state on that this summer. That's really important to us. So that's going to be the lion's share of our work, is doing just that. It'll take time. I wish we could do this yesterday, but we're here today, and it's going to take several months to pull this off. And I don't, you know, we're going to do our best to move it quickly along, because I know there's huge pain points as far as middle mile is in this state. There's also the grant making piece of it. So this would be the third piece of the stool, the third leg. The third leg of this stool is the funding piece. So this is where House Bill 1336 comes into play. And you know, we do have I guess, 60% of our funding allocated to middle mile. And I just want to say I appreciate everybody who gave us input on that, from industry to local government, nonprofits. This is where we landed based on your feedback. And we think it's really imperative that we start really funding it. The other piece of it too is DOLA has been doing middle mile grants, and through the Energy Impact Fund, and their money has been decreased pretty significantly. And they don't, you know, they're not, you know, they have a lot of pressures on that program, broadband being one of them. And so what we have worked with them on is to do that grant making instead of them. Now, granted, they'll still have to do some of it. I don't know. But the thought there is that we stakeholders who are looking for broadband funding, especially in the public sector, they come to our office first. And if we can't fund them, then DOLA would be the stopgap, if they have money, of course. And so, you know, we're looking to take on that grant making, as well as any other projects from stakeholders, the eligible entities in that program for middle mile. It's not just, you know, a town or a city trying to get a meet-me center. It's what are we thinking we want to do holistically, including all of our folks in the broadband space on middle mile. So we're expanding that portion of it to include everybody and all their ideas on middle mile, because it's going to take everybody to help us solve this issue. And so that's where we're looking for some of the grant funding around the funding of middle mile. So very similar to, like, you know, our high cost support mechanism fund, where we have money for last mile. This is money for middle mile. And so we're doing that as well. So we have to set up the process for that. Good news is we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We've been doing this for a while. So, and now we have a couple of programs with grant guidelines, including DOLA and everybody else. We can put together something probably a lot quicker. But that's where we are with the Middle Mile program. Again, a lot of details there. And this is stuff that although there's a lot of details in these higher level strategies that I just mentioned, but we are really, really going to embark on this year and really put a lot of work into it. So, and we have staff to help us. We got approved for staff as well as funding to help fund the strategies that we are going to be coming up with all of you. So it's really good because we can't do it with the folks we could do it with the folks we have, but we have also a $1 billion program that we have to get done too, as well as digital equity. So I'll stop there. And Jeff, I'll take your question.
Thanks, Brandy. I'm not sure exactly how to frame this as a question, but in hearing you talk about the potential for a statewide network, sounds like predominantly using CDOT right-of-way. One area of concern that comes to mind would be if it's a statewide network in CDOT right-of-way, is it going to be your intention or CDOT's intention? You think that be the exclusive route through that particular area? So say there's some middle mile state managed or owned or granted fiber in that right of way. Will other providers be able to still come in and do their own fiber builds in the same stretch of right of way?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jeff. And I wish I had a really good answer for you. But one of the things that we have to look at, and I kind of mentioned this before, are what are our existing agreements and arrangements with providers that are already in the CDOT right of way. And I would say that, we would look at every scenario to see what makes the most sense for us to accomplish the goals of the Middle Mile program, but also making sure that we honor what's already existing. I will tell you that it's a little bit tricky to fund a Middle Mile project that's already, for example, if there's already fiber in the right of way, and a provider's already partnered with CDOT and it's exclusive to that provider. I mean, I don't think, and I'm not Judd's here, but I don't know if we could just go in and say, all right, it's all open access. I know you have agreements with the state, we have to look at some of the legalities of what's existing so that we don't run afoul on existing arrangements and create a bunch of chaos for providers in that sense. We also don't want to duplicate effort as well. And so, when we're using public dollars, we want to make sure that we're working on new fiber. And so it's kind of all of the above. I don't have a specific answer until we actually study it. But what I would really like is, whenever we get to that point where we're talking about these types of scenarios, I want to make sure those comments or concerns that we address in that studying of a middle mile network. And again, today I'm not saying we do a statewide network because I don't even have information to really say that makes sense at this point. So we have a lot of filling in the details, but that's a really great point that we need to make sure that we're aware of when we study it and whenever we propose an idea at some point for Middle Mile. Does that answer your question, Jeff?
Probably as much as you can right now. Thank you.
Yeah, I wish I had more, but we're going to get more. We're going to get there for sure. Go ahead, Ralph.
Yeah, I guess one of the things is, there is existing fiber. There are, as you point out, some consortiums. There's what CDOT has. There's also fiber that's privately owned that can be leased, and some that can't. How are you envisioning assessing all of that as part of this process to understand really what exists there? Or?
Yeah, we have to study all of it.
Okay.
We really do, because again, my gut's telling me after we study it, it's not going to be it's not going to be a one size fits all, because our network has kind of been negotiated and built kind of piecemealed. And there's different timelines for different arrangements that we have as a state. But yeah, go ahead, Jonas, you can chime in because I know you have expertise in this space. So go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that, I mean, there's more than enough fiber throughout the entire state to meet, I think, a lot of these initiatives and to implement a statewide network. I think the challenge is identifying where these networks are and starting to stitch them together under one centralized management that provides that open access and connectivity that I think so many entities are struggling to find. It's not, the fiber's not accessible. It's too complicated. It takes too long, or these networks don't go where you need them. So how do we stitch it all together under one centralized management and provide that ease of access that I think so many folks have been looking for a very long time?
Go ahead, Eric. You're on mute. Can't hear you, bud.
I think he's having technical difficulties.
Yeah, Eric, I think we can wait for you if you can figure out your audio.
No, sorry, Eric. I can hear you trying to ask, but and Eric, feel free to chat it too.
Microphone I have.
Oh, now we can hear you.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So now I was trying to remember what I was going to say. I there's some interesting ideas there that maybe you alluded to, and I think Jonas was referring to too, as far as it seems like you're almost talking about maybe a consortium of available fiber owners that would join to say, if you wanted to get from point A to point B throughout the state, that you could say that something that would get you all the path, and then a common cost, or at least a prescribed cost of those different sections, that you could say, okay, well, this is what it's going to cost me. And I can see that could be very valuable. It can also be very complicated with all the years of, different legal status of those different sections. And, like, I wouldn't want to tackle that there all at once, that's for sure. But it's a good aspirational goal. I'm wondering if maybe at the beginning, it might just be good to catalog kind of what we talked about before, what middle mile kind of arterial fiber exists throughout the state that is usable, that is leasable, period. Now, whatever the cost, but I think the number of strands available is also important in that collection. It's the path and the strands, perhaps the age too, because some of these, I know that what we're using now between us and Durango, some of it is going over lit services that's a 30-year-old fiber. Some people might like to know that because it's kind of reached the end of it's not as reliable, and it could break relatively easily. It may not even be in conduit all the time. But other cases, I mean, that's what I think Project Thor, as I know you're familiar with, Brandy, being an Eagle, it was built by an interconnection of different owned networks. What we're trying to do in southwestern Colorado is got Tri-State, it's got CDOT, it's got the Southern Utes via a consortium of builders throughout of county, various contributors. It's got not just one owner, but Light doesn't really care in general. If you interconnect it, strand to strand, and we know where it is, and you are regenerating it in the proper spot so that it can go the next 60 miles. We're going to be able to get there, and then you can serve off of that. And that's kind of what our philosophy down here is. And we will need help. And this is speaking from our perspective of the Alpine Loop or the southwestern corner interconnection. We're looking towards, it can't be just one region that is in charge of our multi-regional fiber. And we're looking at doing some sort of consortium together that we can have our own board that can manage that, so that it's maintaining standards and that it's being kept up to date. We just put in for just the Region 9 equipment request for DOLA, and it was a $2 million ask. So, and that will probably last you about 7 years before you have to potentially replace that. So it's daunting to even think about not just the fiber portion of it, but the electronic and the management, the labor for the management portions of it for essentially, as you said, nonprofits that are just trying to maybe extract enough value out of these, networks that they can actually still maintain all of that. Otherwise, ISPs won't want to be on them. Because they're not going to be reliable, but we have to do that. And any kind of state help that we can get, whether it's grant applications for the next round of funding for the actual electronics, whether it's sections that we need easements perfected in that cost money to get the easements perfected, whether it's fiber builds or IRUs. All the helps that we can get to build and maintain and interconnect these middle mile networks, we will welcome. Wherever you go in that, I hope that, yes, the reality of what we're considering gets brought into that discussion so that we can actually address those issues specifically.
Any other questions? One of the things that we might do as we're looking at coming up with an RFP for this work, because I think one of the benefits that Arizona and Utah have that Colorado doesn't, when they've developed their networks, their middle mile networks, is they had a lot of starting from a blank slate. So they had starting from a blank slate situation. I don't want to say it's all blank slate, but they didn't have kind of the stitch work or the patchwork that Jonas just mentioned as much as we do. And so, and we have areas with different needs, of course. Eric, to your point, how do we make it work for the unique situations that are that occur in our state? And so, what I might do is before we wrap up kind of what we think might be our RFP that we put out there this summer is running some high level concepts by you for scope of work, just to make sure before we put it out there, just to get your feedback on, so that we can kind of get that perspective, because for example, Eric, you just brought up really great points. We want to make sure that the language in the RFP addresses these things, because the last thing we want to do is come up with an RFP and then we don't get what we want because we didn't tell the vendor we wanted it. So we'll bring that forward at some point. I don't know in what form, but just want to make sure that we get those ideas in the RFP before we throw it out there. So that's what we'll do before we move forward with that. One thing I wanted to talk to a little bit about middle mile as well, because we have the fees and everything that CDOT came up with, the urban and rural fees, and I just want to let everybody know that we're going to be working with CDOT on potential fee waivers for areas of the state that are just so rural that to the feedback that was shared with us, they might need an extra lift by the state. So even though, we didn't see a complete fee waiver at this legislative session, I wanted to communicate to you all that, because of the feedback and everything that the journey we went through with the fees for CDOT and right of way, that, I think, CBO and CDOT will work together also ahead of BEAD, because we want to make sure this stuff is in the BEAD program and all of our programs, quite frankly, and subsidize those networks that really, really, truly, truly need it for a period of time. And so we're looking at that. I can't make any commitments to if that's going to happen or not, because we have to have CDOT to help us with that. But that would be something that CBO would really lean on CDOT to do. And from our discussions, they're open to it, but I don't want to speak for an agency, but we're going to really kind of push for that, because we think it might make sense for those areas of the state that continue they don't have the investment. it's a little bit tricky as well because some of those areas that don't have an investment don't even have middle mile. So it might, I don't know how much it'll help when there's nothing there. But you know, if there's an ability to incentivize, which would be in our broadband roadmap, we put that as one of the strategies in there. Like, how do we incentivize investment in those areas that do not have any infrastructure? And so we really want to see it happen in the areas of the state that we think that make the most sense. The reality is there's some networks that just don't need the subsidy. And so we want to make sure that we try to incentivize those parts of the state that really still are left, but still need that the investments in their areas. So I just wanted to say that as well, because we didn't get a chance to say that to anybody through the process, but that is something that the state is going to be working on this summer as well. And because those grant guidelines will go out to public comment, you can certainly let us know and share it with the folks in your circles to give us feedback on that when we're ready for it to go out. Anybody else have any questions on middle mile? Again, you know, we'll go ahead and do a pre-formal presentation, hopefully next month after we meet with leadership. But those are the ideas that we're circulating right now. So we'll have more details a little bit later. All right. So for future topics, again, I put this on here, middle mile program discussion follow-up, because we do have some follow-up there. And I want to keep these future topics on here so we don't forget them. But the biggest ones are for BEAD. I've been told we're days away from getting approval for volume 2, which is something I hear every week. But I do believe that we're really close to getting approval. We have been approved for everything else, every step. It's just with NIST, and NIST is the we're waiting for our NIST letter. With the BEAD project areas, we are working on that right now as staff and our consultants. So it's a mix of both. And so we're seeking assistance. And so we'll be able to maybe discuss that with you when we're ready. Maybe it'll be June. I just have to double check. Megan and team are working on that. Our GIS team are working on that. And then hopefully for June as well, we can talk at a high level about our high cost per location threshold. So it'll be high level where we landed on some of the things in our approaches, the approaches that we took. We're not putting the high cost per location threshold out for public comment. It's the project area map and the BEAD grant guidelines. But we will discuss at a high level what are the approach that we took for the high cost per location threshold designations. And if the NTIA will let us, of course, because everything has to be approved by them. Hopefully we can look at it area by area. And so instead of doing a one size fits all approach, because in Colorado it just doesn't work. There's just some areas that are more expensive than others. So that's where we are with the future topics. I'm really kind of pinpointing June to do some of these things present to you some of the things that we've been working on for quite a while. But anyway, does anybody have any questions that you want to ask before we close out, or comments, or any observations or anything? Go ahead, Ralph.
Yeah, on the extremely high cost per location threshold, you're saying you're not going to be public about the process. Did I understand that correctly?
Well, I think what we're going to do is we have to be somewhat public about it, because we have to work with the NTIA. But what I'm saying is that we're not putting it out for public comment.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's what I meant. So sorry for the confusion there, but we're not putting it out for public comment to collect feedback on.
Got it.
Yeah. And that's aligns with our volume 2 as well. Anything else? Any other thoughts? Staff, do you have anything that you want to add or anything that wasn't covered, or any thoughts to share? Okay. Well, I thought this was a good discussion. Again, hopefully our team can provide more information on some of the topics we discussed today. But we are working hard behind the scenes to get those ready. We just need to share them with leadership, and then we'll share them with you before we finalize kind of what we're thinking. Because again, your input's really valuable to us. And I always find it very useful whenever we're finished here, some of the comments and feedback you guys have given us. And so it is a very useful group for sure. And I just want to say thank you so much for taking the time today. And we'll reconvene next month. But if you have any comments or questions in between now and then, just let us know. We're always open door at CBO. So thank you guys so much, and you guys enjoy the rest of your week.